According to University of Ghana economist Mr. Kwame Planning, stated that there's need for government to reduce the excessive of executive director in order to leverage on the economic balance and also reduce the economic crisis in Ghana.
Expenditure pattern. Countries like Ghana, what percentage of tax revenue is being spent? What percentage of GDP is government expenditure? Maybe our government structure is too big. Maybe the time has come for the NPP, the governing party, to do what it says it wants to do. Let us do a tender and sell all the non-critical state-owned enterprises that are involved in production and distribution of goods and services, so that the government sector becomes small. And with a smaller government sector, maybe you don't need more than 15%, 40% of GDP as tax revenue to cover that. And I think very important is that every Ghanaian should view an entrepreneur as a national asset. As to how it's going on. And then we as Ghanaians have to decide what we should keep aside. When I was in the Ministry of Finance, when your minister or you allow the Prime Minister to go and promise something, immediately you come, I call the Principal Secretary, which of your projects you want us to cut? And we'll cut it. You know, so to me, where we are now, our emphasis should be cost cutting, expenditures. We create institutions. We call it what? Value for money, audit, sitting in parliament. We don't need that.
Okay.
Let me just end by saying,
30 seconds.
A second by saying that all of us as Ghanaians have to put our shoulders to the wheel to make sure we create an environment that is conducive. When we wake up in the morning, let's say, what can I do for the business community to prosper? If you're a policeman, what are you going to do? Not arrest people, but what are you going to do to make the businessman's life less complicated?
The president less difficult. Why should the president spend time to create find about 2,000 directors for state-owned enterprise when he doesn't know them? You know, so we reduce the burden on the presidency.
Speaking at the Reform and Investment Partnership organized by Ghana and Germany was the Deputy Minister for Finance, Honorable Dr.John Kumah, in his interview with Nation One TV, established on the purpose on E-LEVY passage that will propel government to create more revenue to do more for Ghanaians, irrespective of the concern of some of Ghanaians that were unhappy with the passage.
Country lead to tax increases. I'm very surprised at that conclusion. It's not true, because we are just talking about Fiscal Responsibility Act, which has just recently been passed. We are talking about fiscal councils. We are talking about even cuts in our expenditures. Even recently announced fiscal measures all did not lead to increases in taxes, but somehow there were a lot of cuts in the expenditures as well. Obviously, you cannot do any financial planning by only looking at one side. As you seek to cut, you must also seek to increase your revenue measures so that you are able to balance your sheet. That is why sometimes it's inevitable that government will have to introduce a revenue measure like the E-LEVY. So it's not always that you get a result that once you are seeking a fiscal reform is going to increase taxes. It's just one aspect, which is the revenue measure. But there are several evidence to show that indeed it is not always leading to increases in taxes. I agree also that we can do more in terms of the efficiency level of our fiscals, especially on the expenditure side. We have to do more, and I don't believe it is in names or structures of putting up new institutions. It's about building capacities of existing monitoring and auditing and assurance systems that we already have to be able to do the checks properly. Otherwise, you keep on setting up new institutions and achieving no results. I think we have enough structures and laws in place that if we are able to build capacities of those who go into those offices, we can achieve.
I'm grateful to Parliament of Ghana for passing the E-LEVY. E-LEVY was a very critical component of our revenue measures for 2022. And so passing it means that government will now have more revenues to do for Ghanaians. I've heard concerns about its impact. Yes, there is no time in our history, or any history that I know, that introduction of taxes have been met with joy and celebrations. So obviously people are going to be unhappy, unsettled with the new introduction of a new tax handle. But I want to assure Ghanaians that E-LEVY is a positive news for Ghana. At least we are going to see 3 key interventions in our economy. Government is going to go heavily on job creation for youth, like we have already announced the Youth Start program, with about 10 billion cedis to be raised in the next 3 years, thanks to you. Now, many young people will visit the participating financial institutions like the banks and GE and NEIP with their business proposals and receive financing at a very concessionary rate. So we are looking at E-LEVY doing that for us. Also, infrastructure development like our roads and digital infrastructure are also going to see massive investments, regular payments of IPCs to contractors when they raise certificates, among others. And then also our debt levels. I mean, the alternative people proposed to E-LEVY was going to IMF, which was going for a loan to add up to your already high debt levels. Unfortunately, I mean, it is not going to reduce your debt if you go to IMF. But E-LEVY is not a loan. It's one of the pirated forms of revenues you can raise as a government. It's going to help government to reduce our debt levels. And I believe that once we are able to achieve these 3 things within the year, contrary to the expectation that there's going to be contraction in the economy, I'd rather see a lot of expansion and a lot of activities in the private sector because of interventions of E-LEVY. So let's be hopeful.
According to the president of Association of Ghana Industries, Dr. Kwesi Ayemdeka, stated that there's need for government to intervene on economic depreciation in order to have growth through productive sector.
Assistance before the COVID. So with the combination of COVID and the Ukrainian war, we find ourselves in a very precarious situation. And that is why we're asking government to expeditely intervene in some sectors, the real economy, that will help slow down this inflation and the extent of depreciation. And we're excited to see what the governor did with the intervention. As much as it would have been quicker, it's still better late than never. And then that will then restore some extent of confidence. The fallout of all this intervention is that it brings about some contraction to the extent of growth in the economy. And that will also lead to the extent of unemployment. And we all know then the consequences of that unemployment. So we seek that in the austerity times that government seeks to cut down a number of expenditure to regain the confidence of the economy and the rate of depreciation. Governments should, in the midst of the crisis, target specific interventions into the productive sector to revamp employment and also take a long-term approach to correct the structural defect of the economy. We keep saying in the construction sector, i.e. in the cement factories per se, we should be able to give them some form of intervention that they will do full backward integration into our limestone deposit and mine. We could say same for the agri sector. That gives you the 1D, 1F cliche. With all the interventions they did, including the fertilizer intervention, how far can government go with effective monitoring and possibly control export of our finished products, say the cereals that are grown, that are being exported to the neighboring countries? To what extent can we have a buffer stock, and then out of that to have some stability for the food market? One of the crises that the global world is anticipating is food shortage.